Hello and welcome to the October 19th weekly JupyterLab call. Today we have 12 people on the call. And if you just joined, please find a link to the agenda in the chat and please sign in. And if there's something you'd like to talk about, please add a bullet point. And if there's something that will require more than, let's say, 5 minutes, please add it to the additional discussion section at the bottom. Given that we have a fairly small cohort today, and given that the agenda looks light, I don't imagine we're going to run into this problem. So if there's something you've been holding off on showing people, now's both a good time and a bad time. It's a bad time because the call is lightly attended. It's a good time because you'll have plenty of time and it will go on YouTube. So with that all said, why don't we get started? And it looks like the first two people in the agenda are not currently here. Fred is not going to be joining today, so I will read what he wrote. So JupyterLab 3.5, everything is ready for final release, but Fred's not in. If somebody wants to publish that, that will be great. And I guess it's up to me to solicit help. Anyone who has either published a JupyterLab release before or would like to publish a JupyterLab release for the first time, do we have any volunteers perhaps?
If it's just walking through the publishing steps, I can do that.
It is just walking through the publishing steps. There is a, and it is all Jupyter releaser based these days. And it's a minor version release. So hopefully it is not too big a deal. Oh, hey, there's Jason Grau. And
so I can do that then. I don't have the bandwidth to like thoroughly test it or anything, but I have the bandwidth to like walk through the releaser and make sure it gets published.
Okay, great. Is there anything that you think you need to know beforehand? I think the release.
I've done patch releases already. So okay, yeah, I've done patch release. I just haven't done a minor. I've done a full patches though.
Awesome. Yeah, so it's not really a different process. You'll just be picking. You'll just be doing a minor instead of patch. So fair enough. Great. Thank you so much, Alex. That's awesome.
Yep.
Okay, let's wait for Isabella to join us later in the call, and let's go to Alex.
Yeah, this is more of just an FYI. I finally have the bandwidth again to jump back into what I've dubbed Launcher 2.0, which we last discussed in March. So kind of an FYI to the community, I'm jumping back into that. If anybody has like strong opinions on UI or UX or features that they want to see in a updated, redesigned, modularized launcher, please put them on that issue that I've linked so I'm aware of them as I begin work. And if somebody really wants to help me on it, they can ping me on that issue or on Gitter, and I can see how I can break it up. So, but that is something I would really like to get done this calendar year if possible. We'll see how my bandwidth continues to give me space for that.
Is there anything shareable for it right now?
No, literally just getting back onto that. So there's lots of discussion points linked in that issue from previous dev call with, it's just a nice nest of links, almost like visiting a Wikipedia article. So that's it for me.
I would like to see a new launcher, so cool. Thanks for coming back to it. I imagine, well, what milestone are you targeting? Are you targeting 4.0 for this, or do you think it'll take longer?
I'm targeting as a non-blocker for 4.0. If I can get it done by 4.0, I would love to get it in, but I am intending to write it in a way that it is backwards compatible. So it is essentially an opt-in beta feature.
Okay, well,
So it could technically go out in 4.1 with the way I plan on writing it.
I see. So you don't envision changing the launcher APIs from
I
3
plan
to
on
4?
I plan on extending them, adding essentially overloading the API. So if you call the old APIs, it will just add functionality close to or similar to what is currently on the launcher to the new launcher. If you have the new launcher turned on, and if you don't have the new launcher turned on, it will still just show the old launcher.
Okay, cool.
That's how I'm intending to write it. Specifically because I don't know if I'll have the time to get it in by 4.0. And I don't even know if it's something we want to just completely overhaul in 4.0. And I'd rather have that flexibility of essentially deprecating the old launcher for a version.
Sure. So I guess there's 2 different ways of thinking about this. One is the strictly semantic versioning of the API, which I think we are committed to. The other is it could be a radically different experience, but if the APIs are backward compatible, you're still good to release that as a 4.1 feature. So yeah, cool. Okay. Thanks for coming back to it. That's great.
Yep.
Any questions, comments on this? I know people have opinions about launcher. All right, don't know, speak
I
what they
guess
want.
a question, because I want to go in there and give some feedback.
Yeah.
What's in scope? Is it just about the extensibility, looking at that GitHub issue, or are you kind of like seeking high value ideas for the launcher in general?
Both. My initial goal is to simply rework it so it's more extendable, so you can do more than just add those cards. Like, so you can essentially make it kind of like iOS or Android, where you don't just have to have an icon that opens up an app, but it can do more than that. Like, so you could add a widget or something to it. So that's going to be kind of my starting point, is just getting the same functionality, but with a more versatile way of adding things, and then thinking about adding new features to it after that kind of basis is written.
And when you say widget, are you referring to like JupyterLab widgets? Or
in this case, I was thinking of like widgets for iOS, but I have not yet figured out how, what's the word? Like what level the different extendable objects inside the launcher is going to be. Are they going to be actual JupyterLab widgets? Are they going to be widgetlets? Are they going to, like, I haven't figured that part out yet.
Yeah, and I guess the reason why is that would kind of constrain, is it a real-time UI where you're actively, pulling data into these widgets or not? So that's the only reason I asked.
You could introduce a concept, the way we introduced the concept of the main area widget. You could introduce the concept of a, launcher card or launcher widget or something like that, where the default one accepts the same arguments that the current launcher does, and sort of under the covers gets instantiated and looks pretty much the same, but a user, or not user, but an extension author could choose to implement one that is more sophisticated. And as long as it is inheriting from launcher widget, it shows up and, I don't know, has an animation inside or something cool, or whatever you're sort of imagining. I think introducing a thing that others inherit and can extend might be one avenue to take here. But
that's really close to the idea that I had in my head. But specifically making an extendable class for it is a solid next step. Yeah, no, I like that, using an extendable class specifically. I'll probably launch off of that point.
So Gabriel points out that animations have side effects that we should consider. Yeah, but how else are we going to make JupyterLab irritating to use is the question. Under construction everywhere, right? Cool. Any other questions, comments about this? I think this is exciting.
This could be a segue into Isabella's thing, I think, if I understand what she wrote. Let me check, look at that real quickly. Yeah. So she's been tackling the accessibility issue of reflow, just related to Zoom for the JupyterLab UI. And there's a lot in there, but like one of the things that we've been looking at is like having a button somewhere in the user interface that pulls up the command palette. I think we want to try to work on putting more and more stuff. Well, I think there's a number of commands currently that are not in the command palette, and we want to get as many as we can into there, and then also just have some part, like potentially put something in the UI that allows someone to click to bring it up, and that's very visible. Because I'm not sure like a new user is really super familiar with it. I don't know if this is related at all to the launcher, but I thought that just when I hear the launcher and I hear like making it do more things, I thought, oh, those things are maybe kind of sort of tangentially related.
There could be an area in the launcher or a button in the launcher or something like that. That's true. We used to have a sidebar button that brought up the command palette when the command palette was a sidebar item. Now that the command palette is a modal, I think we have in the view menu, we have the first item is activate command palette, but that requires first going to the view menu. Well, it requires knowing it's in the view menu and going there and then launching it.
Could be a pretty low-hanging fruit to have the first new launcher widget be putting the command palette, like a command palette button or like bar or something at the top of the launcher that just allows you to click it open right from the launcher. So it would be a pretty straightforward low-hanging fruit for an initial widget, like on the current ones.
That's true on one level, but on the other, you know, and you'll I think about this more deeply than the rest of us, but that's pretty precious real estate too, because if this is your first view of what you're going to do inside this application, especially if you're new to the application, it probably ought to lead you into creating a notebook, right? I mean, that probably is the first experience you should have inside Lab if you've never used it before. But I'm not exactly sure. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure where else a button for command palette could go. William says in the chat, in Jupyter Classic, there was a command palette button right in the middle of the button bar. It's very discoverable. And Mike says in the chat, there was an idea of showing press X to open command palette on launcher. Yeah, that's similar to what you're saying, Alex. And Ely is saying, isn't there already a button that pulls up the command palette in Lab? Yeah, that's right. It used to be in the sidebar, but that got changed to a modal. As far as adding commands to the palette, that's also a mixed bag. So right now, each extension author has to make a decision about which commands go in the menus, which menu they go into, which commands have keyboard shortcuts, what the shortcuts are, and which commands get added to the palette, and what category they fall under. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if that needs an audit just for the core commands to see if we truly have the commands that we want in the palette. And I don't really even know what the criteria are to like, how do we know which commands belong there? I don't really know. Do you have ideas about this, Gabriel? You brought it up.
I do think that if you look at VS Code and you look at their docs, they think of the command palette, and this is the way we've been thinking about it as well. They look at the command palette as an accessibility feature. So they try to surface as much functionality as they possibly can into the command palette. And so I think that I like that way of thinking about it. I don't know. That's all I can say at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. I like that thinking about it, but I also believe that we have not been thinking about that way in JupyterLab. What Darian said about doing an audit, we really need to audit what's in the palette, because I remember the last time I opened the palette, I was like, why are half these things in here, and why are so many things not in here? I'd actually say when it was in the sidebar, I liked how it was when it was in the sidebar. I feel like when we moved it out of the sidebar, we should have reevaluated what was in there for the new usage. And I don't think we did. I think we just kind of moved it and left the same list of items.
Yeah, we didn't modify the content of it. We just modified the user experience of it. So I'm looking at VS Code and I see their first item under view in the view menu is also command palette, and it has a keyboard shortcut, but I don't see a button in the interface to launch the command palette there either. And I think it's probably because since theirs also is a mobile and not a sidebar thing, and the main place where they have buttons is either the status bar or the sidebar, they've chosen not to put one there. But I don't know. I mean, the difference between VS Code's menu system and ours, in addition to being native, is at least on a Mac, and I don't know if it's cross-platform, it has the built-in search in the help menu, which always helps me, because right now I didn't know that it was going to be under the view menu like it is in Lab. I searched for it and discovered that it's there. That's a feature that seems both hard to implement and super useful, in case anyone's looking for ideas. Cool. Any other thoughts on Launcher or any of the other things that came out of this discussion?
Just I wasn't quite sure the last point you made, Darian. You said something just something got lost in what you said.
Okay.
Search, view.
Yeah, so on Mac apps, the help menu, the first item is always a search bar if author of the application has implemented it, I think. And so that's how I discovered where the command palette item was in VS Code's menu system. And I've always wished we had that feature in JupyterLab, because you can launch the palette and search for stuff, and that's really great. But people who are used to using Macs probably look under help hoping to find such a thing.
Yeah, Mike and I just shared an issue that I opened in the last week to add a Mac style help menu. And I think this was Brian Granger's suggestion that we open one to add just that functionality. The Mac help menu will also visually highlight, and you can see a screenshot in the issue where the item is, or you can just hit enter and execute it. So it's a nice little quality of life thing, especially as our menus are fairly big and probably going to get bigger.
Right. Oh, that's great. I'm glad it's captured in an issue. I thumbs up the issue.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. All right. Anything else before we move on?
I guess just how deep do you really want to go in this menu design? Are you looking to get into like system level info and solve the conda problem? Or are you really just looking to kind of move things around and clean it up?
I am not sure what you mean. Could you
in the launcher?
Oh, I thought. Okay. Could you please rephrase all of that actually. I'm very confused right now.
Yeah, so if the launcher is being redesigned,
Mhm.
is it really just like a face level moving things around, or are people going to dig into internals, like how different virtual environments are presented?
Oh, I
And
see. I think, and I don't want to speak for Alex, so as soon as I finish this, please, Alex, chime in. But I think that no new concepts that don't currently exist in lab, like environment doesn't exist as a real concept in lab, can be introduced in this pass of a new launcher. But maybe Alex has more ambitious plans. I don't know. What are you thinking, Alex?
No, using the terms that you were using, this would be a facelift. The
Okay.
real key here is taking the APIs from an API level. The idea is to make it easier to add more complex things to that launcher than just run this command. Here's an image and a name for it, and create a tile. But to allow users to, using the term Darian used, to create a launcher widget. And that launcher widget should theoretically be able to do lots of things. So maybe down the line, people might want to create specific launcher widgets that can do really complicated, cool new things. But at least in this first pass, this is much closer to a facelift than anything else. Yeah, I'm theoretically not planning on adding very many, if any at all, new launcher widgets beyond what it currently does. Like obviously the first launcher widget I'm going to create is like command tile. Like here's what we have now. And past that is very much follow up and up to the discretion of people who want to implement new things.
That would, for example, enable us to have workspaces user interface included in the launcher, should we decide to do that in the launcher rather than a separate widget. Yeah,
correct.
Yeah, so there's also the behavior of the launcher where if there's nothing on the screen, it opens up. If you're on the screen and there's a launcher and you use it to launch something, it remains open. But then if you close it and you have something else, it doesn't come back. And so some of those behaviors are intentional, but they may benefit from a revisit as well. Is that within the scope of what you're thinking about?
That stuff is not in the scope of what I'm working on.
Okay.
I'd say it's parallel.
Okay.
Really cool, same package, but if people want to work on that, I could say that we wouldn't even step on each other's toes doing those in parallel.
Yeah, one of them is probably in the launcher package and the other is probably in the launcher extension package. So that sounds right.
Yeah, and I recently touched those things when we did a bunch of work with the toolbar changes, the tab bar changes, and then also when we tinkered with the file browser and how it related to launcher. I forget, I think the launcher and the file browser, we switched the dependency order on those recently. And then we also added the plus button to the tab bar that now opens a launcher. And when we did both those features, we tinkered with a lot of the stuff you were talking about.
Got it. I think also there's a PR that is approved but not yet merged by Nicola with a change to the behavior of the simple mode where it does not load the content of your workspace in the background. And one of the things that he does there also touches this launcher behavior, although I don't remember exactly what. I think it was maybe to not create a launcher in the background or something. I'm not 100% sure, but yeah, this piece of it is sort of, as you say, parallel to the content of the launcher. So cool. Okay, great. Why don't we move on to Gabriel.
I'm muting. Okay. I am doing what Isabella normally does on this meeting, and is letting you know that there is an accessibility meeting 15 minutes after the hour after this meeting, and all are welcome to join.
Great, thank you very much. I think I might miss that because of the location and event I am in, but I am going to miss it and feel bad about it.
I noticed that there's a suspiciously similar looking background on both your video and on Jason Grout's today.
I didn't realize that's what was about to happen when I turned my screen because so I feel a little bit bad, but you know, I just pointed my screen at you before realizing, oh, yeah. Sorry about that. All right, moving on.
I'm suffering from jet lag.
Yeah, no, I mean he's from 8 time zones away. No one can blame him. Is Isabella on the call currently? No, I don't think she is. Okay. Is someone else who has been working on accessibility comfortable discussing this point? Is that right?
I mean, maybe, but can I also try to stall for like 3 more minutes?
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, cool. I mean, put on a show, do it.
I think Isabella will be in a much better position to go over those things, over this issue, this comment, because she wrote it herself and has been really, yeah, I think if we could wait, if we just hold up and wait for her to get here, it'd be easier, better.
Okay, then I will do that thing that I've been soliciting multiple times, which is if anyone on this call is interested in hosting this call and have been holding back, please stop holding back. If there's anything I can say or do that will make it easier for you to host this call, I will say and do that thing. Oh, I recorded that, and that's a pretty strong claim. Within reason. There you go.
You see a handstand.
Yeah, exactly. And not just within reason and within my capabilities. Those are the caveats. But no, really, I mean, I think it would be great. Isabella has volunteered to do some of them, and I appreciate it, but you know, there's plenty of calls where there is no one who has volunteered to do it, and I am happy to continue doing them. I don't have a problem doing it, but I also think it's nice to hear other people's voices. So yeah, consider that. It's a pinned issue on the JupyterLab Team Compass. It's very easy to find. Doesn't get that much traffic, but you know, send some traffic that way, please. Okay, cool. So I guess before Isabella joins, it seems like we've had some, no, I'm afraid I cannot babysit. Sorry, Mike. Well, depends on how many calls you take, actually. So that's negotiable. But there's some conversation in the chat still going about the command palette discoverability. So William pointed out that having the button in a discoverable place has been good both in Classic and in CoCalc. And yeah, I guess, do you collect metrics? Do you know if that's how the users launch it normally?
I don't collect metrics, but I can just tell from, support feedback that people do regularly find the palette and, explore it. So it's extremely discoverable. And also if people are used to Jupyter Classic, it's just exactly the same spot as in Jupyter Classic. And plus people also look at the little drop down for cell versus markdown, and it's right next to that. So I don't know, but it definitely should be about, like, the palette should be very much about Jupyter notebooks if it's, in the button bar for Jupyter notebooks. Whereas in JupyterLab, the palette that you're talking about might be much more general than just Jupyter notebooks. So there's like a subtlety there, I think, between the two potential locations.
It'd
Yeah.
be nice if you could open it up without a notebook open.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
if it's specifically about actions in the notebook, then it makes sense to have it, only openable from the notebook. But there is a command palette that's about like the whole JupyterLab interface, and they're kind of different things. So potentially.
Right. So the command palette in JupyterLab is a lot like the command palette in Visual Studio Code, and the command palette in both Classic Notebook and Notebook 6 and Notebook 7, right? That is much more about Notebook simply because it's a smaller application with fewer commands. I don't know. Yeah, as Jason said, having to have a notebook open to find that button makes sense in a UI where you're only looking at notebooks, really. In a UI where you're looking at a launcher when you first open it, or a code console, or a text editor, etc., we have other real estate that it could potentially go in. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Put a button on the menu bar right next to the help menu.
Yeah, there could be a button on the menu bar next to the help menu. That's actually sort of a halfway to that searchable help menu, because the command palette itself is searchable, except it's not truly analogous because the menu system has different commands in it than the command palette. It's not one-to-one exactly.
I just realized Jason Grout's talking, but he's muted, but it's because he's sitting next to you.
Yeah, yeah.
That was just really confusing me. Because I think I hear Jason's voice, but he's muted, so that's not Jason. But, okay, sure.
Accurate. All right. Is there anything anyone else would like to discuss? Oh, Mike, cool. You are up.
So I created a pull request which removed about 15 unused styles. Some of those were unused for like 6 years. And we haven't done a great job with removing features, removing the styles as well. So I opened a proposal pull request with a function which would allow you to check for unused styles on runtime in Galata. This is, of course, prone to generating false positives and false negatives for various reasons, but there is some reasonable defaults in the check which would hopefully be useful. And if we think that this is a good approach, that could be also reused by extension authors who use Galata to test the extensions, and hopefully reduce the number of CSS rules which we have and do not use. Largely, this is relevant to the performance effort because the recalculation of styles is taking a very long time for large notebooks or workspaces. And if anyone has thoughts about this, think that maybe this is not the best approach, maybe there is a better way, please leave feedback on the pull request. And the next step that I'm thinking of is trying to enforce the convention how the CSS rules should use classes, specific classes as possible to reduce the style matching time and increase performance. This is something that is not formally specified, but it is suggested in the contributing guidelines, but it's in no way enforced. And we recently landed with lots of pull requests merged, which has the rightmost selector, which is like a div or span. And this means that when there is a change high up in the DOM, every single div or span is being revisited by the browser to check whether this selector matches. So suggestions, opinions, are welcome.
So the PR that you linked has this tool that you created in Galata to do this, but what were the styles that you found that aren't being used? Did you remove them in a separate PR, and what sort of things were they?
The first sentence has a link to another pull request. I'm just linking that.
Oh, I see. Okay, cool.
And those are
Oh, yeah,
a
interesting.
variety of different things. Some things even prior to JupyterLab 1.0 release.
I see. Bless you. I mean, this is really good that you found some systematic mechanism to do it. I wouldn't have even known how to do this really. So this seems like a really clever approach to it. I don't know. Does anyone else had any experience trying to rein in the surface area of their CSS?
Just to clarify, it's not so clever because when you run that on the top level of JupyterLab app, there are many components which are not in the DOM currently, or for some reason do not have like the mod active style class. So you will have lots of false positives, and I ended up with a list of 300 styles, which I just went through mostly one by one and thought, is it plausible that this is not used anymore? So that was a little bit of manual effort, but it's much easier to add kind of regression checks when limiting those to one components, one at a time. So the other pull request adds these regression checks to the file browser, so we can be sure that in the future we are not adding styles which are not used or removing components without removing the styles. So that will be a gradual effort where we can decide on component by component basis whether that's worth including or not.
I see. So 95% false positive rate, but if it can be tied into visual regression testing and removing them one by one, presumably you can get it to better than 95%.
Yep.
Okay, cool. I mean, still, I would have just, used my eyes. So, so it's still better than where I would have come from. So yeah, no.
Sorry, just one more thing. JupyterLab fresh install of the latest version has about 8,000 styles, and only a small fraction of those come from our styles. Most of those are like in 3.x that is Blueprint. In the latest, this is from Awesome, and this is the Toastify and others, and Mapjax. So and if you install JupyterLab Kit, it really explodes because you get hundreds more different styles, some of which are not being used at all. So I don't know, this seems like a very big task to be more clever about this, but it will also require like some work in the extensions and rethinking how we use bringing dependencies.
Right. Wow, 8,000. This is kind of daunting,
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
This is a great idea.
Yeah.
Try to narrow things down at least.
Yeah, I know I just walked in, but I've definitely run into the unused styles even in my limited CSS adventures. So I'd be very happy to see something with this. Yeah.
I have no idea what purgecss.com is other than what's on the name on the tin, but I like that name.
It might be worth comparing. It's a very different approach, I think, but it's for example, among other things, a Webpack plugin. So it just analyzes your source code when doing the build. So it's more like tree shaking your CSS rather than not putting CSS in your source code at all that you don't need. So it solves a different problem, but might be relevant for comparison.
Cool. Yeah, let's paste that into the notes so that's not lost. Okay. Any
Relevant links.
other comments? Or questions or anything, or should we move on to Isabella? Okay, cool. Isabella, you're up.
Hello. Thanks for making it till I got here. Sorry about conflicting calls. First thing I need to remember to say, Jupyter Community Call is next week. All are welcome. I've linked to the Discord and discourse in the agenda, and that should have all the info you need. I think I have the HackMD link corrected. They must have changed their permissions thing because I keep getting on like everything I'm doing people mentioning. Anyway, let me know if there's issues with that HackMD too, and I'm happy to fix it 2 weeks in a row. Would be very funny. But yeah, that'll be exciting. So hope to see you there. I would say feel free to be Halloween inspired and dress up if you wish, but I have no super exciting plans yet. To probably the more important thing, there has been an issue that's been open for perhaps an embarrassing to me amount of time about JupyterLab in kind of high browser zoom situations. This is an accessibility concern. For those of you that don't know, we need to be able to zoom to 400% zoom according to WCAG standards. And I believe Firefox and Chrome actually support up to 500% now. If you open JupyterLab and start zooming in that high, you're going to have a fun time, but maybe not the most productive time with things. So trying to come up with some solutions around what a better experience for that would look like, because right when you start zooming in that much, we have limited real estate. I don't know if we are at the point of additional discussion. So the first thing I wanted to do is kind of flag that issue for you all and request some feedback, because we're going to have to do something pretty opinionated, to be honest, to make it fit at that size. And I know that can be controversial. I'm happy to walk through stuff. I just don't want to take more time if there's other discussions we need to have first.
We don't have anything else on the agenda, and I think we can talk about this. Yeah, unless someone's been holding back.
We can have a few seconds of awkward silence for Darian. Okay, cool. I'm going to share my screen then on this issue. And yes, I agree, Lane. There's a lot of use cases where I would just like Zoom to be better for for all kinds of reasons. But I wanted to give some feedback on like where the threshold was coming from. So right now I have it on this comment I linked to. There's kind of two main paths that I see. They're like diverging paths. I have a personal feeling we'll end up somewhere in the middle, kind of compromising, but either we're going to emphasize the document, right? So like that's in the main document area, or we're going to emphasize the rest of the UI surrounding it, right? Like all the stuff that isn't the document, which is kind of what we currently do in the sense that like the sidebar will overtake, right? If you're going to zoom in. So with this, my opinionated take is when you start zooming in, you actually lose the sidebars. More things get collapsed into the command palette. You can have the command palette as a button, which I know is something that has been requested in passing before because it's only kind of buried in a main menu right now or with the shortcut. So you're able to navigate to all those things through there. The UI is not lost. You just aren't seeing it. Like it's not taking up screen real estate. The main problem I have to solve with that, which is what was playing out and I wasn't talking about, was in most cases, I think it would make sense to have kind of sidebar items that are not dependent on the document area take up kind of like the main document area currently does for the settings editor or the launcher are technically UI that act like a document and kind of mimicking that behavior. But for things like the table of contents that are document dependent, we'd have to come up with another kind of overlapping solution because it does rely on whatever document you have focused. And then the other approach is much closer to what we have would be, right, everything just starts zooming. We just make it so that the sidebars are going to intentionally take up the whole space when we start working with them instead of kind of unintentionally. Right now, they just push things out of the way and aren't optimized within the space. Like there's a lot of kind of maximum width things that when the text starts to scale, but the box that the text in is not, does not work quite right. So yeah, so those are kind of the two approaches. I'm trying not to throw too much at you at once. There's a lot to work out within both of those approaches, to be honest with you. So let's see, what are we seeing? Oh, searching for the scroll issue. Yeah, so the thing I will say that's also one of my concerns is I think just because you're zooming in doesn't mean you should be getting like drastically different UX, right? You're still in JupyterLab. That's kind of one of my fears with this document focused, where we lose some of those main UI areas visually and just have them packed away somewhere else. But at the same time, maybe this is controversial. I do think that the document is probably the main focus. I kind of like that it allows, like, this is a, what am I trying to say? This is in a lot of other information dense and like kind of document centric UIs, what I'm seeing a lot when they go to mobile or go to other small screens is that they kind of put the document first and put the UI kind of to the side. I think it supports like that you can read and not need to edit is kind of the motivation, right? Because you could just be opening this to read very zoomed in. You don't actually have to be editing it. And if you're not editing, all these things are kind of in the way. At the same time, is that too divorced from the rest of the JupyterLab UX? So I'm talking a lot. I'm just trying to throw out the ideas that I've been thinking of, but I would love to be quiet and listen to you now.
So in, I think, a not fully thought out attempt to think about mobile experience before JupyterLab 3, I added this attribute on the application class that was the mode, whether it was desktop or mobile. And the idea was when you go to mobile, you're basically using simple mode. That ended up being a bit too simplistic, but the premise behind it was exactly what you're saying. And given that many people's primary experience is going to be Jupyter Notebooks UI, given that many people's primary experience in lab is notebooks, I think that your first model, the document-centric model, is it appeals to me. I don't know what other people are thinking.
I can say personally too, because I still have an environment running that does that simple mode change. Actually, I like the idea. I just think it needs to be a little bit more opinionated because it just removes a little bit right now. I think that would be my personal opinion.
Yeah, I think it was closing the sidebars and removing the status bar maybe, but it probably, like, we probably can afford to get rid of the top area and only have the menus. We probably, you know, there's, and even the menus themselves, I'm not sure. There's definitely thought that needs to go into that. Okay. I just meant the actual API for it was probably wrong. Having a mode that's only 2 choices and sitting on the top level application is probably not right. And I'm afraid of removing it because Jupyter frontend is now used by a bunch of other things, but we're not really using it that way anymore, really. I know other people have thoughts about this, so please chime in.
Even if you think I should surface this somewhere else, chime in. Because I know it's just not an issue right now, but this is a pretty, people will have opinions about this, I expect.
I mean, do you want to see what my notebooks look like zoomed in right now?
Sure.
Sure. Let's see if I can pick the right window.
Are you saying this is in view of modifications or as a demo of what it does? Yeah, demo.
Yeah, this is just like a demo because like you
Yeah.
were asking what should we prioritize, and it's like it's pretty clear that the notebook has no space to breathe, and this is at like 240. And the only time I would be doing this is because I want to share content in the notebook with someone else, like during a demo. One thing that immediately comes to mind is like, these pandas tables, like that's the #1 output cell, I would say. And they're not like resized in any way, the column widths. And then a major problem that I haven't brought up because it's kind of nitpicky is you in output cells, you only get left to right scroll unless you like click your mouse button, but you have to go like all the way down to the bottom to and then scroll and then like go back and say like what row was I in. So yeah, I'd say content is definitely the prioritization. Like
Can I also ask you to open the running menu, because I know there's some issues in there I'd like to show. That in the sidebar, isn't it? Or the square with the circle with the oh man. Oh, okay, interesting. Whatever we're percent. Oh, because we're at 240. I was like, it still fits. When you get higher, those start to have some more issues. Cool. Thank you.
I think this does show though. So for example, the counter prompt being on the left side probably stops making sense when you're so zoomed in. It probably makes better sense to use vertical space instead of horizontal space there, and the margins disappearing. Like you don't need the shadow, the box shadow and the margins on the document when you have such little space to work with. And there's probably a lot. Because there's only 3 minutes left on the call, I'm going to stop recording.
Thank
So
you.
brace yourselves.